Betrayal rarely comes as a singular, definitive moment. For the Death Guard, their fall to Nurgle represented a culmination of countless choices, each decision pulling them deeper into the Plague God's embrace. Their transformation from stalwart defenders of humanity into diseased vectors of decay stands as perhaps the most profound corruption in the Imperium's history, a change so fundamental that it challenges our understanding of free will itself. The Death Guard's binding to Nurgle transcends mere allegiance or worship. Their connection to the Plague God runs through their bodies at a cellular level, with every breath drawing in and expelling countless diseases, their flesh eternally rotting yet unable to die. This perpetual state of decay and regeneration represents more than just physical corruption. It embodies a philosophical transformation that has reshaped their very understanding of existence. Before their fall, the F-Teen Fear Legion exemplified resilience and determination. Under Primarch Mortarion's leadership, they became renowned for their ability to endure any hardship, to fight through the most toxic environments, and to emerge victorious where others would perish. This very strength, however, contained the seeds of their undoing. Their pride in their resilience, their belief in the power of endurance, created an ideological framework that Nurgle would later exploit with devastating effectiveness. The question of whether the Death Guard remains eternally bound to Nurgle delves deep into the nature of chaos itself. Unlike traditional pacts or allegiances, their connection to the Plague God exists on multiple levels simultaneously: physical, spiritual, and metaphysical. Each Plague Marine carries within them a universe of diseases, their bodies serving as incubators for Nurgle's endless experiments in pestilence. Their armor, once gleaming ceramite, has fused with their rotting flesh, creating an inseparable bond between warrior and wargear. This fusion of space marine and supernatural decay raises profound questions about the nature of choice and corruption in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. The Death Guard's transformation wasn't simply a matter of pledging allegiance to a new master. It fundamentally altered their biology, their psychology, and their very souls. Every aspect of their existence became interwoven with Nurgle's influence, from the plagues they spread to the philosophies they embrace. Yet beneath the layers of corruption and disease, traces of their original nature persist. The Death Guard maintains a grotesque reflection of their former discipline and brotherhood. Their tactical acumen remains sharp, their strategic minds unclouded by the madness that often afflicts other Chaos Space Marines. This preservation of their core qualities, twisted though they may be, suggests that their binding to Nurgle may be more complex than simple damnation. The implications of their fall extend far beyond the F-Teen Fear Legion itself. Their transformation serves as a dark mirror to the Imperium's ideals of strength and resilience, showing how even the most noble qualities can be perverted when pushed to extremes. The Death Guard's endless existence in a state of living death challenges conventional notions of survival and victory, forcing us to question what it truly means to endure. As we examine the Death Guard's relationship with Nurgle, we must consider not only the historical events that led to their corruption, but also the ongoing nature of their existence. Their story is not simply one of fall and damnation. It is in continuing evolution of what it means to be both blessed and cursed, to be simultaneously immortal and eternally dying. This duality lies at the heart of understanding whether their binding to Nurgle truly is irreversible, or if somewhere in the maze of corruption and decay, a path to redemption might still exist. Nurgle's dominion over the Death Guard extends through a complex hierarchy of power, with the Plague God himself residing in his garden within the Warp, eternally tending to new diseases and corruptions. Unlike other Chaos Gods who seek immediate destruction or rapid change, Nurgle's approach reflects calculated patience, his influence spreading through the Death Guard like a meticulously engineered contagion. His garden serves as both laboratory and paradise, where every disease ever conceived flows through rivers of corruption, and where the most faithful of his followers witness the cycle of decay and rebirth firsthand. Mortarion, Primarch of the Death Guard, stands as both master and slave within this hierarchy. His position as Demon Primarch elevates him to near godlike status, yet binds him ever tighter to Nurgle's will. From his plague planet, he commands his forces with the same tactical brilliance that once served the Emperor, but now filtered through millennia of bitterness and supernatural corruption. His massive scythe, Silence, drips with toxins capable of killing even the most resilient beings, while his personal armies of Death Shroud Terminators maintain their role as silent guardians, though now corrupted beyond recognition. Typhus, once First Captain Callus Typhon, wields influence nearly equal to his Primarch within the Death Guard's ranks. His betrayal of the Legion sealed their fate, his actions during the Horus heresy revealing a long-standing dedication to darker powers. As the host of the Destroyer Hive, Typhus embodies a different aspect of Nurgle's favor. His body plays host to a unique strain of the Destroyer Plague, making him a living vector of supernatural disease. His command of the Plague Fleet brings Nurgle's gifts to countless worlds, each campaign spreading new strains of corruption through the galaxy. The Plague Marines themselves form the core of the Death Guard's military might, each warrior a walking contradiction of death and immortality. Their bodies host countless diseases, their armor becoming an ecosystem of decay that somehow strengthens rather than weakens them. Veterans of the Long War bear mutations and gifts from their patron, with some developing unique strains of disease that mark them as particularly favored. These warriors retain their legion's legendary discipline, executing complex military maneuvers despite their bloated, rotting forms. Nurgle's Tallyman fulfill a unique role within the Death Guard's hierarchy, maintaining intricate records of plagues, deaths, and the ebb and flow of decay. These scholarly figures combine mathematical precision with religious fervor, their counts and calculations holding occult significance in Nurgle's grand designs. Their presence on the battlefield serves both practical and symbolic purposes, their numerological obsessions somehow enhancing the effectiveness of nearby troops while cataloging new varieties of suffering for their god's approval. The biologous putrefiers stand as the Death Guard's masters of chemical and biological warfare, though their experiments far exceed anything found in mortal laboratories. These twisted scientists combine their legion's ancient knowledge with Nurgle's supernatural gifts, creating compounds that blur the line between disease and sorcery. Their backpacks contain bubbling collections of experimental plagues, while their injection devices deliver concentrated doses of corruption directly into enemy ranks. Foul Blightspawn occupy a specialized niche within the Legion's structure, wielding weapons that spew forth the most virulent concoctions from Nurgle's garden. These warriors serve as living proof of the Death Guard's mastery over disease, their presence turning battlefields into testing grounds for new plagues. The viscous streams they project can reduce armored vehicles to bubbling pools of corruption and transform living tissue into colonies of festering bacteria within seconds. The noxious Blightbringers maintain the Death Guard's corrupted spirituality, their bells tolling a doom-laden rhythm that spreads supernatural corruption through sound waves alone. These dark chaplains lead their brothers in twisted rituals that strengthen their connection to Nurgle, their ceremonies combining military precision with demonic devotion. The discord they create affects reality itself, weakening the barrier between real space and the warp wherever they walk. At the lowest ranks, clouds of Nurglings accompany Death Guard forces, these diminutive demons embodying Nurgle's perverse sense of humor. Despite their seemingly comic appearance, these creatures serve as both scouts and saboteurs, their small size allowing them to infiltrate enemy positions and spread disease ahead of the main force. Each Nurgling contains a fraction of Nurgle's consciousness, making them far more dangerous than their appearance suggests. The Poxwalkers, though barely sentient, play a crucial role in the Death Guard's strategies. These former humans, transformed by various strains of zombie plague, serve as both cannon fodder and psychological weapons. Their endless advance demonstrates the inevitability of Nurgle's corruption, while their presence creates opportunities for new diseases to evolve and spread through population centers. Each shambling horde represents a different strain of the zombie plague, their variations carefully monitored by the Legion's tallyman for signs of promising mutations. Legion Thor Team's path toward corruption began long before their encounter with Nurgle's influence, rooted in the toxic atmosphere of their Primarch's homeworld, Barbarus. This deadly planet, perpetually shrouded in poisonous fog, shaped not only Mortarian's worldview, but established the foundation for the entire Legion's future fall. The planet's ruling witch lords had engineered the upper atmosphere to be lethal to normal humans, forcing the population to survive in the valleys below while they dwelt in mountaintop fortresses. Life on Barbarus instilled a particularly harsh philosophy in its people: survival through endurance. The constant struggle against the poisonous environment created warriors who measured strength not through martial prowess alone, but through their ability to resist toxins and continue fighting in conditions that would kill lesser beings. This mindset perfectly aligned with Nurgle's own twisted philosophy about the nature of strength and resilience. The Emperor's arrival on Barbarus and subsequent recruitment of Mortarion into the Great Crusade carried these environmental and philosophical influences into the wider galaxy. When Mortarion took command of his legion, he immediately began reshaping them in Barbarus's image. Training regimens emphasized resistance to toxic environments, and the Legion specialized in warfare under the most horrific environmental conditions imaginable. Their modified power armor incorporated enhanced life support systems and sophisticated rebreather apparatus. Technological advancement within the Legion focused heavily on chemical warfare and environmental sustainment. Their armories developed increasingly potent toxins, while their armor and vehicle designs prioritized operation in lethal conditions. This specialization, initially a tactical advantage, would later serve as a gateway for Nurgle's influence, as the line between chemical warfare and supernatural contagion grew increasingly blurred. The Death Guard's reputation for resilience drew them into the most hazardous war zones of the Great Crusade. They became specialists in enduring conditions that would devastate other Space Marine legions, from rad-bombed wastelands to worlds infected with engineered plagues. Each victory reinforced their pride in their physical superiority, gradually fostering a dangerous arrogance about their invulnerability to corruption. Their psychological conditioning emphasized stoic endurance of pain and hardship, creating warriors who viewed suffering as a path to strength. This mindset, combined with their experience in toxic warfare, established a framework that would later allow Nurgle's influence to seem almost logical, an extension of their existing philosophy rather than a corruption of it. The Legion's apothecaries became increasingly focused on pushing the limits of their enhanced physiology, experimenting with new toxins and testing their resistance to ever more deadly substances. Cultural practices within the Legion began to shift subtly, embracing a fatalistic view of warfare and existence. They took pride in their ability to endure what others could not, developing ritual practices around exposure to new toxins and diseases. These rituals, initially meant to prove their superiority, created psychological patterns that would later resonate with Nurgle's own corrupted ceremonies. The Legion's recruitment practices favored candidates from toxic death worlds and pollution-heavy industrial planets, further reinforcing their specialized nature. These recruits brought with them various cultural traditions regarding survival in hostile environments, many of which contained seeds of what would later bloom into full-blown plague worship. Their collective experiences shaped a Legion-wide mindset that viewed conventional notions of purity and corruption as irrelevant to true strength. Political tensions within the Imperium affected the Death Guard's psychological development as well. Their role as specialists in chemical and biological warfare made them somewhat isolated from their brother legions, who often viewed their methods with distaste. This isolation fostered a sense of bitter pride and resentment, emotions that would later fuel their susceptibility to chaos corruption. The Legion's obsession with endurance extended to their strategic doctrine, emphasizing wars of attrition and grinding advance over swift victories. This approach, while effective, exposed them to prolonged periods of suffering and hardship, gradually normalizing levels of pain and contamination that would have broken other warriors. Their victories came at the cost of experiencing horrors that would have driven lesser minds to madness, building an unconscious acceptance of increasingly extreme conditions. Their fleet operations concentrated heavily on ships equipped for chemical and biological warfare, creating vast stockpiles of weapons that bridged the gap between conventional toxins and supernatural plagues. These ships became floating laboratories where boundaries between science and sorcery began to blur, though none recognized the danger at the time. The fleet's tendency to operate in isolated, hazardous war zones further reinforced their psychological separation from the rest of the Imperium's forces. The Death Guard's descent into Nurgle's embrace accelerated dramatically during the warp transit to Terra at the height of the Horus heresy. Their fleet, caught in a massive warp storm engineered by First Captain Typhon, found themselves trapped in a nightmarish realm where time and reality lost all meaning. The ship's Geller fields, humanity's primary defense against warp entities, began to flicker and fail under the supernatural assault, leaving the vessels vulnerable to the predations of the Immaterium. Within the stricken fleet, a mysterious plague began to spread among the Astartes. Unlike normal diseases that their enhanced physiology could easily overcome, this sickness proved resistant to all attempts at treatment. The malady started slowly at first: a persistent cough, slight fever, minor skin lesions. Many Marines initially dismissed these symptoms, their legendary resilience leading them to believe they could overcome any ailment through sheer willpower. As the days stretched into weeks, the disease progressed with horrifying speed. Flesh began to bloat and distend, internal organs liquefied and reformed in new configurations, and armor fused with corrupted tissue. The Death Guard's enhanced ability to endure pain and sickness became their greatest curse, as they remained conscious and aware throughout their transformation. Their bodies, designed to resist death at all costs, refused to succumb, even as they experienced levels of suffering beyond mortal comprehension. The corruption spread through the fleet's ventilation systems, contaminated water supplies, and even through direct contact between battle brothers. The Legion's apothecaries worked feverishly to contain the outbreak, but their efforts proved futile against this supernaturally engineered contagion. Each attempted cure only seemed to accelerate the disease's progress, as if the plague was learning and adapting to their resistance. Quarantine protocols failed as infected Marines, driven mad by pain and fever, broke containment to seek out their brothers. The ship's corridors became nightmarish scenes of horror as fully corrupted Death Guard hunted down their unchanged brethren, spreading the contagion through touch, breath, and violence. The very environment of the vessels began to transform, with metal surfaces developing cancerous growths and corridor walls weeping putrid fluids. Mortarion himself was not spared from this corruption. The Primarch's legendary resilience, which had allowed him to survive the toxic atmosphere of Barbarous, merely prolonged his suffering. He watched helplessly as his legion succumbed to the plague, his own body racked with pain as the disease worked its way through his enhanced physiology. His pride and determination, once sources of strength, became chains that bound him to an existence of endless torment. The psychological impact of the transformation proved as devastating as the physical changes. Many Marines experienced vivid hallucinations, witnessing demon-like entities moving through the ship's corridors or hearing whispered promises of relief from their suffering. These visions, products of both fever and genuine warp phenomena, gradually eroded their sanity and resolve. The Legion's strict discipline began to crack under the weight of collective agony. In the depths of their suffering, Nurgle's influence began to manifest more directly. Those who had fully succumbed to the plague reported experiencing moments of euphoric clarity, where their pain transformed into a kind of twisted pleasure. These Marines became evangelists for their condition, preaching to their suffering brothers about the gifts they had received and the wisdom they had gained through their transformation. The fleet's Navigator Corps suffered particularly horrific fates, their warp-sensitive minds making them especially vulnerable to the corruption spreading through the ships. Their mutations took on uniquely grotesque forms, with many developing additional eyes or sensory organs that forced them to perceive the full spectrum of decay affecting the fleet. Some went mad instantly, while others gained disturbing insights into the nature of their transformation. Life support systems throughout the fleet became breeding grounds for new strains of the plague, each more virulent than the last. The Death Guard's expertise in chemical warfare worked against them, as their sophisticated filtration systems and environmental controls were turned into delivery mechanisms for Nurgle's corrupting influence. The very technologies they had relied upon to survive hostile environments became tools of their damnation. The final stage of transformation occurred when the plague reached critical mass within the fleet. Reality itself began to break down as the barrier between material space and the warp thinned. Entire sections of ships merged with their corrupted crews, creating nightmarish organic-mechanical hybrid environments. The distinction between living tissue and inanimate matter blurred, with bulkheads developing pulse-like rhythms and deck plates sprouting fungal growths that responded to movement. The pivotal moment in cementing the Death Guard's eternal bondage to Nurgle came through Mortarian's ultimate choice. Faced with his legion's immeasurable suffering, the Primarch found himself confronted with an impossible decision. Nurgle's emissaries presented him with a bargain: accept the Plague God's patronage and embrace the transformation, or watch his sons suffer eternally, neither dying nor finding relief from their torment. In that moment of desperation, Mortarian's legendary resolve finally broke. This singular decision reverberated through the very fabric of reality. As Mortarian pledged himself to Nurgle, a fundamental shift occurred within the Death Guard's collective essence. The Plague God's power surged through the fleet, fundamentally altering not just their physical forms, but the very nature of their existence. Their genetic structure, already corrupted by disease, underwent a final metamorphosis that bound them permanently to their new patron's will. The transformation manifested differently in each warrior, reflecting Nurgle's appreciation for variety in his creations. Some Death Guard developed crystalline growths that hummed with pestilential energy, while others became hosts to colonies of supernatural parasites that enhanced their combat abilities. The more fortunate found their tactical acumen heightened by their connection to the Plague God's ancient knowledge, gaining insight into the artistry of decay and corruption. Within the fleet's laboratories, stored cultures and weapon samples underwent their own transformation. Experimental plagues merged with warp energies, creating entirely new strains of disease that defied conventional understanding. The Death Guard's arsenal of biological and chemical weapons evolved into something far more potent, tools that could corrupt not just flesh, but reality itself. These weapons became extensions of Nurgle's will, capable of spreading both physical and spiritual decay. The Legion's machinery and vehicles fused with their new nature. Tanks developed lesions that wept corrosive fluids, while engines began to run on inexplicable biological processes rather than conventional fuel. The merger of mechanical and organic elements created war machines that were effectively immortal, healing damage through the same processes of decay and regeneration that affected their crews. Perhaps most significantly, the Death Guard's relationship with death itself underwent a fundamental change. No longer did they simply endure. They became active participants in the cycle of decay and rebirth that Nurgle represented. Their bodies entered a state of perpetual decomposition and regeneration, making them effectively immortal while forcing them to experience endless cycles of death and resurrection. The psychological impact of this transformation proved as profound as the physical changes. The Death Guard's stoic acceptance of hardship transformed into a zealous embrace of their condition. They began to view their diseases as improvements rather than afflictions, taking pride in the variety and potency of the contagions they hosted. Their military discipline remained intact, but became focused on spreading Nurgle's influence rather than achieving tactical objectives for their own sake. This new perspective extended to their understanding of victory and defeat. Traditional concepts of military success became secondary to the spread of corruption and decay. The Death Guard learned to view their battles through Nurgle's lens, where even apparent defeats could serve their purpose by spreading disease among their opponents. This fundamental shift in their warfare philosophy made them increasingly unpredictable and dangerous opponents. The Legion's hierarchy underwent its own transformation as new champions rose to prominence based on Nurgle's favor rather than traditional military merit. Warriors who displayed particular aptitude for spreading disease or developing new plagues found themselves elevated to positions of authority. This new order reflected Nurgle's own preferences, creating a command structure that prioritized innovation in corruption over martial prowess alone. Through this turning point, the Death Guard's fate became inextricably linked with Nurgle's grand designs. Their transformation represented more than just a change in allegiance. It was a fundamental restructuring of their very nature. The Legion's expertise in endurance and toxic warfare found its ultimate expression in their new role as vectors of supernatural disease. Their understanding of strength through resilience evolved into a celebration of endless decay and rebirth. This moment of transformation established patterns that would define the Death Guard for millennia to come. Their actions became part of larger cycles of corruption and renewal, their campaigns serving both military objectives and ritual purposes. The Legion's identity became permanently intertwined with Nurgle's influence, making any potential separation seem not just impossible, but unthinkable to those affected by the change. The Death Guard's transformation reverberated throughout the galaxy in ways that continue to shape the Imperium's struggles. Entire sectors fell into quarantine as new, inexplicable plagues swept through populations with frightening speed. These diseases defied traditional medical knowledge, exhibiting characteristics that suggested conscious malevolence rather than natural evolution. Medical facilities became battlegrounds as infected patients transformed into carriers of increasingly virulent strains. Planetary defense systems proved inadequate against the Legion's new methods of warfare. Traditional void shields and defense arrays could not prevent the microscopic agents of corruption from infiltrating populated areas. The Death Guard's attacks left worlds not just defeated, but fundamentally altered, their biospheres corrupted beyond recognition. Fertile agricultural planets transformed into festering swamps, while hive cities became incubators for new forms of plague. The psychological impact on Imperial forces proved equally devastating. Units that had previously fought alongside the Death Guard now faced the horror of confronting their corrupted former allies. The sight of these walking plague carriers, still maintaining their military precision while spreading supernatural disease, shattered morale and challenged fundamental beliefs about the nature of corruption. Many Imperial commanders found their tactical doctrines useless against an enemy that welcomed injury and turned death itself into a weapon. Within the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Death Guard's transformation sparked a crisis of doctrine. The fusion of organic decay with mechanical components challenged their understanding of machine spirits and the distinction between biological and artificial systems. Reports of plague-infected vehicles continuing to function despite catastrophic damage forced tech priests to reconsider their approaches to both warfare and machine maintenance. Some Forge worlds implemented extreme quarantine protocols, fearing that even their most sacred machines could fall prey to these supernatural corruptions. Astro-psychic communications networks suffered unprecedented disruptions as the psychic echo of the Death Guard's transformation rippled through the warp. Astropaths reported experiencing overwhelming sensations of decay and regeneration when attempting to send messages through affected regions of space. Some developed physical symptoms mirroring those of plague victims, while others received prophetic visions of worlds drowning in disease. The efficiency of Imperial communication suffered as a result, with some messages becoming corrupted or lost entirely. The Inquisition's response reshaped Imperial policy regarding disease control and population management. New protocols were implemented for identifying and containing Nurgle's influence, often requiring the sacrifice of entire populations at the first sign of supernatural contamination. The Ordo Malleus developed specialized containment procedures for dealing with plague-corrupted artifacts and prisoners, recognizing that traditional methods of destruction often proved ineffective against Nurgle's gifts. Naval doctrine underwent significant revision as the threat of plague-corrupted vessels became apparent. Boarding actions, once a common space warfare tactic, became increasingly rare as the risks of exposure to Death Guard corruption became better understood. Fleet commanders developed new quarantine protocols, sometimes requiring the immediate destruction of any vessels showing signs of contamination, regardless of their strategic value or the status of their crew. The ecclesiarchy found itself challenged by questions of faith and redemption that the Death Guard's condition raised. The concept of warriors who were simultaneously cursed and blessed, experiencing endless death yet unable to truly die, complicated traditional Imperial teachings about mortality and divine punishment. Some radical sects emerged, preaching that the Death Guard's condition represented a form of twisted immortality that challenged the Emperor's own power over life and death. Agricultural worlds faced new threats as Death Guard corruption proved capable of affecting entire ecosystems. Crops developed strange mutations, livestock succumbed to inexplicable ailments, and soil chemistry altered to support only the most grotesque forms of life. The Administratum was forced to implement extreme measures to prevent contaminated food supplies from reaching other worlds, sometimes condemning entire populations to starvation rather than risk spreading corruption through relief efforts. Research into plague prevention and cure became increasingly dangerous as it became clear that studying Death Guard contagions could lead to corruption of both body and mind. Medical facilities dedicated to understanding these supernatural diseases often succumbed to the very afflictions they sought to combat. The line between researcher and subject blurred as exposure to these plagues led to physical and psychological transformation, forcing the Imperium to approach such studies with extreme caution and often from a distance. Battlefield doctrines evolved to account for the Death Guard's new capabilities. Imperial commanders learned that victory against these forces often required accepting significant casualties and implementing scorched earth policies to prevent the spread of corruption. Traditional metrics for measuring combat effectiveness proved inadequate when facing an enemy that could turn defeats into victories simply by spreading disease through their own deaths. The Death Guard's arsenal evolved into a nightmarish fusion of arcane science and supernatural corruption. Their signature weapon, the Plague Knife, undergoes constant mutation, its blade hosting colonies of bacteria that develop new strains of disease with each strike. These weapons possess a form of primitive consciousness, actively seeking to infect new hosts and adapting their diseases to overcome different types of resistance. The supernatural metallurgy of these blades allows them to corrode other materials on contact, while remaining eternally sharp despite their perpetually rusted appearance. Plague Marines developed specialized delivery systems for their contagions, incorporating living tissue into their armor's mechanisms. Vectorium arrays, complex networks of pipes and dispensers integrated into their power armor, allow for the precise deployment of different plague types. These systems can adjust the virulence and transmission methods of diseases in real time, responding to battlefield conditions and enemy resistances with horrifying efficiency. The arrays themselves pulse with unholy life, nurturing new strains of disease within their corruption-laden chambers. Their vehicle pool underwent grotesque modifications as machine spirits merged with plague entities. Rhino transport vehicles developed organic ventilation systems that process and enhance airborne toxins, while land raiders sprouted tentacle-like appendages capable of injecting virulent substances directly into enemy armor. Engine blocks mutated into living organs that process corruption itself as fuel, allowing these vehicles to operate indefinitely without conventional resupply. The symbiosis between machine and plague creates war engines that are essentially immortal, healing damage through supernatural regeneration. The Legion's expertise in siege warfare evolved into mastery of environmental corruption. They developed techniques for introducing plague spores into water supplies and atmosphere processors, causing entire hive cities to become incubators for new diseases. Their engineers perfected methods for corrupting void shields and defense arrays through targeted application of plague-infused scrap code, turning protective systems into vectors for spreading contamination among the defending forces. Death Guard armorers mastered the art of crafting plague-enhanced ceramite, creating power armor that actively participates in the spread of disease. This living armor develops symbiotic relationships with its wearer, exchanging diseases and mutations in an endless cycle of decay and regeneration. The armor's machine spirit becomes infected with Nurgle's influence, developing a malevolent intelligence that works to protect and nurture the plagues growing within its confines. Their biological warfare capabilities expanded beyond conventional understanding, incorporating warp-based mutations into their arsenal. Virus bombs were modified to release not just deadly pathogens, but reality-warping spores that could corrupt the basic laws of physics within their area of effect. These weapons blur the line between natural and supernatural infection, creating zones where the boundary between real space and the warp becomes dangerously thin. The Legion developed new applications for their combat drugs and stimulants, creating compounds that induce controlled mutations and enhance their carriers' ability to spread disease. These chemical cocktails alter their users' biology in real time, allowing them to adapt to enemy countermeasures and develop immunities to new weapons. The drugs themselves become hosts for intelligent plague entities, evolving alongside their users to create ever more effective delivery systems for Nurgle's gifts. Death Guard scientists perfected techniques for corrupting standard Imperial technology through targeted application of plague-infused components. They can transform ordinary machinery into plague engines through careful introduction of contaminated parts, creating cascade effects that spread corruption throughout entire systems. This expertise allows them to turn captured enemy equipment against its former owners, not just through conventional repurposing, but through fundamental corruption of its basic functions. Their mastery of environmental warfare expanded to include manipulation of weather patterns through plague-infused atmospheric processors. These devices can generate toxic rain, plague-carrying fog, and corrosive storms that spread contamination across vast areas. The technology combines ancient Imperial weather control systems with Nurgle's supernatural influence, creating conditions that favor the spread of disease while hindering enemy operations. The Legion's fleets underwent extensive modification to serve as mobile plague laboratories. Their ships develop unique strains of disease in transit, using the duration of warp travel to culture new infections. The vessels themselves become living entities, their halls filled with experimental plague chambers where captured specimens are used to test new contagions. These ships can deploy their biological weapons through multiple vectors, from conventional bombardment to subtle atmospheric contamination. Their expertise in defensive operations evolved to incorporate living fortifications that actively spread disease to attackers. Walls became breeding grounds for new plague strains, while defensive emplacements developed the ability to spray corrosive substances that combined physical and spiritual corruption. These fortifications demonstrate a perverted form of adaptability, learning from each assault and developing new methods of infection to counter enemy tactics. Galdor Voss, once a revered battle line sergeant of the Death Guard, emerged as one of Nurgle's most innovative champions. His fascination with bacterial evolution led him to develop new methods of combining different plague strains, creating virulent hybrids that could overcome even the most sophisticated immune systems. Operating from his laboratory stronghold on the plague planet Morbidius, Voss conducts endless experiments on captured populations, methodically documenting each new mutation and its effects. His research has produced some of the most devastating plagues in the Legion's arsenal. The infamous corpse maker, formerly apothecary Meros, gained notoriety for his ability to transform healing practices into weapons of corruption. His perversion of medical knowledge allows him to keep victims alive far beyond their natural breaking points, extending their suffering while studying the progression of various diseases. The Corpse Maker's experiments focus on the intersection of physical and spiritual decay, exploring how different types of corruption affect both body and soul. His medical journals have become revered texts among the Death Guard's plague doctors. Festus the Tainted, master of the Plague Fleet Eternal Decay, pioneered new techniques for spreading corruption through void warfare. His tactical innovations include the development of plague torpedoes that can infect entire ship systems with scrap code-carrying viruses, and the creation of boarding protocols that maximize the spread of contagion through enemy vessels. Under his command, captured ships become floating laboratories where new strains of ship-specific plagues are cultivated and tested. Lord Pustulant, wielding the legendary plague flail Mortis Eternal, earned his title through his mastery of close combat plague warfare. His weapon hosts 7 distinct families of disease, each evolving independently and competing to prove its virulence in battle. The Lord's tactical approach emphasizes personal combat with enemy champions, using these engagements to test his latest contagions against the strongest opponents. His victories have added countless new strains to the Death Guard's arsenal. The enigmatic plague scribe Thoros maintains the most comprehensive records of Death Guard diseases and their effects. His vast archives, stored in a fortress of living tissue and corrupt data engines, document every successful infection and mutation observed by the Legion. Thoros' work provides invaluable tactical data about which plagues work best against different types of opponents, from heavily augmented Mechanicus forces to various Xenos species. His analytical approach to spreading Nurgle's gifts has dramatically improved the Legion's combat effectiveness. Dredge Master Maleficent commands the Death Guard's most sophisticated plague cultivation facilities. His expertise lies in developing diseases that target specific genetic markers, allowing for the creation of plagues that can devastate entire planetary populations while leaving strategic resources intact. Maleficent's methodical approach to plague development has resulted in some of the most efficiently lethal contagions in the Legion's history, each carefully engineered to achieve maximum impact with minimal waste. The plague champion, known as the Withering Eye, specializes in long-range warfare, having developed techniques for delivering highly concentrated doses of disease through precision targeting. His modified plague weapons can inject specific strains directly into enemy command structures or vital systems, causing cascading failures that can cripple entire formations. His tactical innovations have made him particularly effective against heavily fortified positions and mechanized forces. Biologus Putricella earned her reputation through the development of hybrid plague forms that combine multiple vectors of transmission. Her work focuses on creating diseases that can spread simultaneously through air, water, and direct contact, making them nearly impossible to contain once released. Her greatest achievement, the Thousand-Form Flux, can adapt its transmission method based on environmental conditions and available hosts. The Plague Surgeon Gangrox revolutionized the Legion's understanding of supernatural diseases through his study of demonic pathogens. His research facility, a twisted maze of flesh and metal, houses countless specimens of demon-infected tissue, each carefully documented and analyzed. Gangrox's insights into the relationship between physical and warp-based diseases have led to the development of plagues that can corrupt both matter and spirit simultaneously. Vector Primus Thorax stands out for his mastery of plague deployment in urban warfare. His techniques for introducing diseases into Hive City infrastructure have resulted in some of the Death Guard's most successful conquests. Thorax's expertise lies in identifying critical points where minimal application of plague agents can achieve maximum spread through population centers, often bringing entire hives to their knees without requiring direct military engagement. The being known as the Living Plague, ancient even by Death Guard standards, exists as a walking ecosystem of diseases. Through countless centuries of exposure and mutation, this champion's body has become a laboratory for plague evolution, constantly generating new strains through the interaction of various contagions. The living plague serves as both warrior and research subject, its very existence providing valuable data about long-term disease development and adaptation. Whispers among the Death Guard speak of a hidden vault deep within their plague planet, containing samples of every disease ever created since their fall to chaos. This legendary repository, known as the Terminus Sepsis, supposedly houses strains of plagues that even Nurgle himself has forgotten. Some believe that studying these ancient diseases could reveal patterns of evolution that might predict future mutations, while others warn that disturbing such ancient contagions could unleash horrors beyond even the Death Guard's control. A persistent mystery surrounds the fate of those few Death Guard who were not present during the Legion's transformation. Reports occasionally surface of isolated warriors who maintain their original gene seed purity, operating independently in remote regions of space. These theoretical survivors represent a tantalizing possibility. Could their uncorrupted genetic material offer insights into reversing Nurgle's influence, or do they simply represent another avenue for the Plague God's eventual corruption? The phenomenon known as the Shrouded Convergence continues to puzzle even the most experienced plague sorcerers. During certain stellar alignments, all diseases within a specific region simultaneously mutate in identical patterns, suggesting some underlying mathematical principle governing plague evolution. These events create entirely new strains of disease that exhibit seemingly impossible characteristics, defying known laws of biology and physics alike. Ancient texts reference a legendary figure known as the Plague Smith, who supposedly exists in a state between reality and the warp, continuously forging new diseases through the combination of physical and spiritual corruption. Some believe this entity represents an aspect of Nurgle himself, while others suggest it might be an ascended Death Guard champion who achieved a unique form of apotheosis through mastery of disease creation. The question of consciousness within diseases created by the Death Guard remains a subject of intense debate. Several documented cases describe plagues exhibiting signs of rudimentary intelligence, actively adapting their behavior to overcome resistance and seemingly coordinating their spread through infected populations. Whether this represents true consciousness or merely complex evolutionary algorithms remains unclear. Mechanicus data vaults contain encrypted references to Project Immortalis, a classified study of Death Guard physiology that allegedly discovered paradoxical properties in their cellular structure. The research suggests that the Legion's bodies exist in a quantum state of simultaneous decay and regeneration, potentially offering insights into the nature of mortality itself. All researchers involved in the project subsequently disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The phenomenon known as plague echoes presents another enigma. In locations where the Death Guard have fought major battles, subsequent diseases that develop naturally often mirror characteristics of their supernatural plagues, even generations later. This suggests some form of biological memory within the environment itself, as if reality remembers and recreates the patterns of corruption it was exposed to. Investigations into the Death Guard's relationship with time reveal disturbing anomalies. Their diseases sometimes affect past and future versions of their targets simultaneously, creating temporal paradoxes where symptoms appear before exposure or continue affecting descendants of the originally infected. This manipulation of causality through disease vectors suggests possibilities that even the Plague Marines themselves may not fully understand. The existence of plague nulls, individuals who demonstrate complete immunity to Nurgle's corruptions, represents one of the most significant mysteries facing the Death Guard. These extremely rare individuals appear to possess some inherent quality that renders them impervious to both natural and supernatural diseases. Understanding the source of this immunity has become an obsession for many within the Legion, leading to countless experiments and theoretical studies. Reports persist of certain Death Guard vessels achieving impossible speeds during warp transit by manipulating the relationship between disease and reality. These ships appear to use the spread of corruption as a propulsion method, riding waves of contagion through the immaterium. The principle behind this phenomenon remains unknown, but its implications for understanding the nature of plague warfare continue to intrigue both Imperial scholars and Chaos sorcerers. The symbiosis paradox presents another unexplained aspect of Death Guard existence. Despite hosting countless competing diseases, their bodies maintain a perfect balance between different strains, each plague somehow enhancing rather than hindering the others. This cooperative relationship between normally competitive organisms suggests an underlying organizational principle that defies conventional understanding of disease dynamics. The Death Guard's eternal bondage to Nurgle represents more than just a cautionary tale of corruption. It fundamentally reshapes our understanding of free will in the face of cosmic powers. Their transformation demonstrates how strength and resilience, pushed to extremes, can become the very chains that bind. The Legion's fate raises profound questions about the nature of choice in a universe where gods can alter the very fabric of reality and consciousness. Their continued existence serves as a dark mirror to the Imperium's own ideals of endurance and sacrifice. Each plague they unleash, every world they corrupt, adds another layer to their complex legacy. The Death Guard's methods have forced the development of new defensive strategies, pushing the boundaries of medical science and forcing innovation in ways that might otherwise have taken millennia to achieve. Scholars studying the long-term implications of their corruption have identified disturbing patterns in disease evolution across the galaxy. The Death Guard's influence appears to have accelerated the natural mutation rate of countless pathogens, creating an arms race between plague and resistance that spans entire sectors. This evolutionary pressure continues to shape both natural and artificial immune responses, potentially altering the course of human biological development. The philosophical impact of their condition continues to resonate through Imperial institutions. Their state of eternal decay challenges fundamental assumptions about the relationship between life and death, forcing theologians and philosophers to reconsider ancient doctrines. Some radical scholars propose that the Death Guard represent a third state of existence, neither truly alive nor dead, but perpetually transitioning between the two. Their influence extends beyond the physical realm, affecting the very nature of warfare in the 41st millennium. The threat of Death Guard corruption has led to the development of increasingly sophisticated containment protocols and quarantine procedures. These advances in biological defense have paradoxically improved humanity's understanding of life itself, even as they seek to counter its most perverted forms. The Legion's mastery of plague warfare has introduced new dimensions to strategic planning. Military commanders must now consider not just immediate tactical objectives, but the long-term contamination of battlefields and resources. This has led to the development of predictive models that attempt to calculate the spread of corruption across decades or even centuries, fundamentally changing how wars are fought and won. Their existence poses ongoing questions about the nature of consciousness and identity. Despite their corruption, the Death Guard maintain aspects of their original personality and tactical acumen, suggesting that something of their former selves endures beneath layers of physical and spiritual decay. This persistence raises disturbing possibilities about the nature of the soul and its resistance to chaos corruption. The technological legacy of their fall continues to influence Imperial research and development. Studying their methods of disease propagation has led to breakthroughs in understanding how corruption spreads through both organic and mechanical systems. These insights, though gained at terrible cost, have proven crucial in developing new methods of protecting vital technology from chaos influence. Their relationship with Nurgle has established new paradigms for understanding the interaction between material and immaterial realms. The Death Guard's ability to manifest physical symptoms of supernatural diseases challenges traditional boundaries between reality and the warp. This fusion of natural and supernatural plagues has forced a re-evaluation of fundamental principles in both medical science and warp theory. The psychological impact of their condition ripples through space and time, affecting not just their enemies, but all who study their nature. The horror of their existence, the combination of tactical precision with uncontrolled decay, creates a unique form of psychological warfare that continues to evolve. Their very presence forces opponents to confront existential fears about mortality and corruption. Their endless existence serves as a testament to the price of pride and the consequences of choosing survival at any cost. Yet they also represent the incredible adaptability of life itself, even in its most corrupted forms. The Death Guard's legacy will continue to shape the galaxy's development, their influence spreading like the very plagues they engineer, ensuring that their impact on the universe remains eternal, just as their corruption remains irreversible.